TLDR.
Yes.
This is going to be one of my hard, extreme opinions that I'm going to stick to. Couches are bougie. We have perfectly good floors. The ground is there. Just sit on the floor. You don't need chairs, sofas, recliners. Just sit on the floor. It's good, keeps your hips open. You have to have a good posture. It's good for the spine. Forget it.
Well, that's just like your opinion, man.
It's not.
Also, I've been to your house and you have a sofa.
Well, there is one sofa there, isn't there? I keep it there as a reminder of the sins of modern society. I like to sit on the floor across from it and look at it and meditate on this.
Ah, okay.
Yeah. This is what I do when I'm not talking about China. I angrily stare at furniture. And the Chris Chappell lore has been expanded for whoever is keeping track.
Okay, very few, perhaps.
Probably.
All right. So anyway, we've talked about this pneumonia that's spreading in China, and we know something about it, but we still know very little. And it kind of does remind me of like the very early stages of COVID, which at the time was the Wuhan virus, according to Chinese state media.
So we can imagine in a couple of months, YouTube will delete this video because of misinformation or something.
Because we called it the Mycoplasma pneumonia, when in fact the correct name is, I don't know.
Whatever, futurists will know.
The Fort Detrick virus or bacteria or something. So it kind of reminds me of that, where it's just like something scary is happening in China. It's starting to spread, but we don't know hardly anything about it. Mm-hmm. It's also making kids sick, which is different, but in a way scarier. Mm-hmm. So yeah, but like what else? Like what can we do? Like there's not like a health directive, and honestly, like even if the CDC tried to do some extreme measure, I think people would have a harder time complying with it now, because the memories of 3 years of COVID lockdowns are still so fresh and stinging for so many people.
Yeah, especially as more information is coming out about like the impact on especially children having been kept out of schools for so long, the different kind of socializing problems that are coming out.
If it's killing kids like a really high percentage, then that's one thing. If it's making kids sick for a few weeks, but there's very few deaths, then you do have to consider the social impact of keeping kids. I mean, like just kids I've talked to since COVID, like I remember asking this teenager, like, what do you think is the most significant event in your lifetime? And like for me, it was 9/11.
Well, for me, it was the switch.
And so like I just thought it would be some political thing, and she's like, "Oh, it's for sure COVID. Mm-hmm. Like it just changed everything about being social. It changed things about friendships and relationships. It changed my relationship with school. Changed how I look at history." I'm like, whoa! Like I didn't consider that impact. Mm-hmm. But if you're 14 years old or 8 years old or something, and there's like a 2-year lockdown, this is such a big percentage of your life.
Yeah,
that it just changes everything. And I think that most Americans are aware enough of the dangers of doing that again that it probably can't happen again like that.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
Well, yeah, I actually have a big on the other channel, Gamers Unbeaten. I have a whole Deep Thoughts While Gaming about Baldur's Gate and identity. And yeah, identity is very much created in relation with other people. Like who you are depends on your relationship with other people. And especially COVID made people very isolated. And that definitely has a huge impact on people's identity. And that's pretty important.
Yeah. And this is a good episode. So we'll put a link below and you can check that out.
Yes. Give it views.
Gamers Unbeaten.
Yep.
All right. Shall we talk about something that is potentially even worse than this pneumonia?
Well, if it's what I think you're getting at, this is actually better. Because it's the opposite. Instead of this horrible disease spreading from China, this horrible thing is retreating from the rest of the world and going back to China.
Yes, and we are talking about pandas.
Yes, the Edinburgh Zoo has sent back its pandas at the November 30th, end of November.
And they are not getting more.
They're not getting more.
And for context, what has happened in the last several decades is China has, sort of lent pandas to different zoos around the world, but they're never given. They're just on loan. And the zoos have to pay something like $1 million a year for each panda. And on top of that, if the pandas breed and have children, those baby pandas born in America or born in Scotland or whatever, they actually still belong to China and not to the country or the zoo that they were born in, which is a really unusual situation. Because that's not how it works.
And the pandas are really expensive. Like zoos, they can easily be spending like $1 million a year on these pandas.
Oh yeah,
and like the idea is hopefully it brings in. Well, I mean, they say it's about conservation and blah blah blah. No, it's about zoos attracting people. Like anyone who's played Zoo Tycoon knows, it's about getting the people in to get the money.
Right.
But it's very easy for the pandas to actually be so expensive that they're not making that money back. This has affected other conservation efforts because it's just so expensive because people like these stupid pandas. When I sit opposite my sofa and glare at my sofa, I'm also thinking about pandas and how much they're a waste as well. Yeah. The good news is the U.S. will soon have no pandas.
Well, so the Washington, D.C. sent their pandas back recently, and the last zoo in the U.S. to have pandas is Atlanta. And in theory, they're slated to send those to China sometime in 2024.
I think they're usually given on 10-year contracts, and those are expiring.
Right. They've got 2 adults and 2 cubs. So now, while I understand your hatred for pandas,
it's very understandable.
I think there's another strategy that we could take here as the U.S. So the Communist Party demands the return of these pandas, right? Including ones that were born in the U.S.
Yeah.
Now, I think that if the Communist Party does some kind of aggressive but short of war tactic, for example, like a certain espionage incident or a South China Sea incident, or diplomatic kind of thing, right?
Well, in general, China is consciously using short of war tactics all the time.
Right. And so it's very hard for the U.S. to respond to that because it's well, it wasn't bad enough that we should start a war over it, but it's not nothing, and we should respond somehow. But it's very hard to respond because there's no symmetric response.
A good example is the artificial islands in the South China Sea.
Right.
China claims this whole South China Sea is their territory. They start building these artificial islands, and the U.S. is like, don't do that. But obviously, them starting to pile up sand is not a reason to go to war.
Right.
And so China ignores them.
Gradually, a little more sand. Now it's not a shoal, it's an island.
And Chinese people are living on there. And so then the U.S. is like, okay, just don't militarize them. And then they do.
Right.
And at no point is it's always short of war. You're not going to get into a nuclear war with China because of sand.
Right.
But now all these islands are militarized. And it's like, if there ever is a war, they are now strategically much better off.
Right. So I think the U.S. should respond with its own short of war tactics, and not because it's cunning or devious, but simply because the CCP needs to know that we are in on their game, right? And so one thing we could do is we could keep the pandas. And that's a short of war tactic, and China's not going to go to war over it. They'll issue angry statements.
Well, not just keep the pandas. That's not what you're thinking.
Oh, no. Well, that the pandas born in the U.S.
That's the thing.
Become essentially the equivalent of U.S. citizens.
Birthright citizenship for pandas.
Yes. So firstly, I agree with that in general, that any pandas born here should have been U.S. Owned or protected. And the idea of sending them back to China when they've never been to China, and there's been many cases like this over the years, that's absurd. That's crazy to me.
Especially because caring for the pandas is so expensive. U.S. zoos do foot the bill. In addition to what they are paying to China, they're responsible for all the funding, the upkeep of these.
Right. And I understand there's a bill in Congress that would do something like this. Although, obviously most bills in Congress do not ever become laws, but there's
Well, and
a
it'll be a
discussion
moot
of it.
point if soon we don't have any pandas.
Yeah. So the key is to keep these, 4 pandas, the 2 adults and the 2 cubs in Atlanta, and just keep them long enough that then we can use it at an appropriate time. And I think this would be overall good. The only downside is then, from your perspective, Chris, there are pandas.